Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dr. Ghost and today we have a bit of a special video for you guys. Now if you guys aren't aware, today marks I think it's the 76th anniversary of the Indianapolis's sinking. Now it's not really a very special anniversary in terms of, celebrations, because what happened to the Indianapolis was a very, very sad story. But at the same time, it's something that I think deserves to be remembered. So, in today's video, we're going to talk about the history of the USS Indianapolis CA-35. So, the Indianapolis was the second and last Portland-class heavy cruiser constructed by the New York Shipbuilding Corporation. The Indy was laid down on March 31st, 1930, and launched on the 7th of November, 1931. Initially, the Indianapolis was designed as a light cruiser, but because of her thin armor. However, she was later classified as a heavy cruiser given the hull designation CA-35, which it's kind of funny because the Indianapolis was initially a light cruiser. It was going to be CL-35, but they gave her the designation CA-35. So, anyway, mainly the thing that constituted the Indianapolis being classified as a heavy cruiser was her giant 8-inch 203mm guns, which were the standard size guns of heavy cruiser during that period. As built, the Portland-class cruisers were designed to have a displacement of 10,400 tons, and once fully loaded and equipped, that number jumps nearly to 13,000 tons. However, when the Indy was completed, she did not reach the designed weight. She was instead a little over 10,100 tons. I believe that's the number before she was given all of her weaponry. Now, during World War II, she would be given a lot of weapons and what have you, and lots of refits. Now, speaking of refits, after all of her refits, the Indianapolis, or the Indy, had an 8 caliber Mark 9 guns in 3 triple mounts. She had 8 5-inch 25 caliber dual-purpose guns, 2 QF 3-pounder Hotchkiss guns, and 24mm Bofors, 40mm Bofors, 1.57-inch Bofors arrayed in 6 quad mounts, and 19mm 0.9-inch Oerlikon cannons, or rather 0.79-inch Oerlikon cannons. So she had a lot of weaponry during her service. She had an absolute boatload of AA. She also had very good 8-inch 55 caliber Mark 9 guns. As you guys can see in game, for example, she has 6 in the front there, and she has 3 in the back. So she's got some very powerful guns. And of course, she had 8 5-inch 25 caliber dual-purpose guns, which dual-purpose means that the 5-inch guns that were on the Indianapolis, like for example here, if you guys look on the right side there, 127mm Mod 6s, I guess that's after she got her refit. Yeah, she had some 5-inch guns, and they are dual purpose, and they do count as AA. So, keep that in mind. So, keep in mind, too, the Indianapolis did not have torpedoes. So, she had no torpedoes during the war. That was kind of standard for most, if not all, American cruisers, except the Atlanta-class light cruisers, and, of course, the Omaha-class light cruisers. They did get torpedoes. However, the Baltimores, the New Orleans, the Northamptons, the Pensacola's, they did not get torpedoes. Pretty much every single American heavy cruiser did not get torpedoes. Now, her service during World War II, on December 7th, 1941, Indianapolis leading Task Force 3 was conducting a mock bombardment at the Johnston Atoll during the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Indianapolis was absorbed into Task Force 12 and searched for the Japanese carrier responsible for the attack on Pearl Harbor. However, the task force did not locate them. Indy returned to Pearl Harbor on December 13th and joined Task Force 11. During the New Guinea campaign, with Task Force 11, she steamed to the South Pacific, to 350 miles, 560 kilometers south of Rabaul, escorting aircraft carrier Lexington. Late in the afternoon, on February 20th, 1942, Task Force 11 was attacked by 18 Japanese aircraft. Of the 18 Japanese aircraft, 16 of them were shot down by fighters sent off from the Lexington, and were shot down by the Indianapolis's AA, so who knows. Throughout the remainder of World War II, the Indy would be a part of numerous task forces providing anti-aircraft fire support and of course fire support in general just from her giant 8-inch guns. She later earned 10 battle stars for her contributions during the New Guinea campaign, Aleutian Islands campaign, 1943 operations, and her actions onwards up to her infamous mission, the transporting of the nuclear components. So basically during World War II, her service was mainly just escorting. Like most heavy cruisers, Indianapolis did just escort. She escorted ships, and she provided fire support. That's basically what most of the cruisers did during World War II, at least for the United States Navy. I believe the Indianapolis did sink a few ships. It might have been like a couple oil tankers. I believe she was bombarding a port, and she managed to hit some of her 8-inch shells on, I think, one of the transport ships, or it might have been an oil tanker, I don't know, and she absolutely wrecked it. So Indianapolis does have a pretty interesting service history. She's got over 10 battle stars, which means she was at 10 separate battles. So she has a pretty impressive service history. Nothing like, per se, the USS Enterprise, but she still had a pretty good service history for, obviously, her ship and what she was designed for. Now, on to her most infamous mission here, the transporting of the nuclear components. Fast forwarding about, 4 or 5 years to 1945. After major repairs and an overhaul, the captain of the Indianapolis, Charles B. McVay, received orders to undertake a top-secret mission of utmost significance to national security. Indy is to proceed to Tinian Island carrying enriched uranium and about half of the world's supply of uranium-235 at the time, and other parts required for the assembly of the atomic bomb codenamed Little Boy, which would be dropped on Hiroshima a few weeks later. Keep in mind that none of the crew aboard the Indianapolis, including the captain, knew what they were carrying. They had no clue. The captain was kept out of the blue. The crew was kept out of the blue. The guys that were guarding the nuclear components didn't even know what they were guarding. They were just told, hey, don't let anybody come near this shit, and that's exactly what they did. So they were literally transporting the components that were used later on for the 2 atomic bombs that were both dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So very, very, very valuable cargo indeed. Now, later on, regardless, the Indianapolis, with her top-secret cargo on board, departed San Francisco on July 16th, 1945. Meanwhile, in New Mexico, the U.S. Army was conducting the first atomic bomb test, codenamed Trinity, approximately 5:29 a.m. The test was codenamed in the Jornada del Muerto Desert, about 35 miles south of Socorro, New Mexico. The codename Trinity was assigned by Robert Oppenheimer, the director of the Los Alamos Laboratory. The test was an implosion-designed plutonium device nicknamed the Gadget, of the same design as the Fat Man, which was later detonated over Nagasaki. The Indianapolis would arrive in Pearl Harbor on the 19th of July. The Indianapolis set a speed record of 74.5 hours from San Francisco to Pearl Harbor at an average speed of about 20 knots. So this Indianapolis was basically going from point A to point B as fast as she could because she had no escorts. The Indianapolis was not given any escorts, mainly because of her top-secret mission. They didn't want to risk at all getting the ship spotted, which I don't really understand. I think she could have had escorts later down the line, which we will talk about here. Shortly after arriving in Pearl Harbor after setting her speed record, Indy then raced on to Tinian, unescorted, delivering the atomic bomb components on the 26th of July, 1945. After delivering her cargo, she was then sent to Guam, where a number of the crew who had accompanied their tours of duty were relieved by the other sailors. Indy would then leave Guam on the 28th of July, 1945, to join Jesse B. Oldendorf's Task Force 95. He was the vice admiral at the time. Now, during her journey, or during her little sailing mission on to Guam to join Task Force, she was then at approximately 12:15 a.m., shortly after midnight on July 30th, 1945, the Indianapolis was struck on her starboard side by 2 Type 95 torpedoes, which those torpedoes in particular were the best in the world. Those torpedoes, when they hit something, there was nothing left usually after they hit. They were disgusting. They blew off everything, and especially the Indianapolis, because the Indianapolis did not have a lot of armor. Remember, she was initially going to be a light cruiser. So when these torpedoes struck the Indianapolis, they struck extremely, extremely hard. One in the bow and one amidships from the Japanese submarine I-58, captained by Machitsura Hashimoto, who initially thought he had spotted the New Mexico-class battleship Idaho. So literally the captain of the Indianapolis was like, or the captain of the I-58 submarine was like, wait, that looks like an American battleship Idaho, New Mexico class. I'm going to go ahead and identify it as such. And well, he was wrong. It was not the Idaho, who he actually misidentified there. The explosions on the Indianapolis from the 2 torpedo strikes rocked the ship and caused massive damage. The ship began taking on water and, began to list heavily. During the war, the Indianapolis had a great deal of armament and was therefore top-heavy from all of her refits and all the armor and radars. She was very top-heavy, which means she sat lower in the water because there was so much weight on the deck. It was pushing the ship down more. So she was very top-heavy. And she managed to get off literally 3 distress signals or calls, and basically all 3 of them were ignored. I think there was a guy that got the distress call, but it was too staticky to make out. He could not. It sounded basically garbled to him. He couldn't make it out. And the other 2 guys, I think one of them thought it was a Japanese trick, and he just ignored it. The other guy was, I think, drunk and basically said, yeah, well, it's probably nothing, and they basically shrugged it off. So the 3 distress calls that got out, one of them I don't even think got even heard, and the other 2 were just completely ignored. There might even been more, I'm not sure, but yeah, pretty much all of them were ignored or taken as a Japanese trick and really not taken seriously. Moments later, after the obviously the Indianapolis, there was no way it was going to be coming back. The Indianapolis's captain, Charles McVay, gave the order to abandon ship. This order had to be passed via word of mouth since the ship's electrical systems were knocked out. She would settle completely by the bow, and 12 minutes later, Indianapolis completely rolled over. Her stern rose then high up in the water and out of the water, and then sank shortly after. Some 300 of the 1,195 crewmen went down with the ship. With a few lifeboats and many without life jackets, the remainder of the crew was set adrift. Approximately 900 sailors, survivors of the initial torpedo attack, were left drifting in groups of the expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Beneath them, a far more sinister danger was lurking. Hundreds of sharks, drawn in by the carnage of the disaster, moved towards the survivors. After feeding on the dead from the explosions, the sharks then turned their attention towards those who were still alive, bobbing in the large swells of the ocean surface. Or of the ocean surface, rather. Some of the men pounded the water, kicking and yelling when the sharks approached. Many decided that grouping together was their best defense, but with each shark attack came clouds of blood in the water, followed by more screaming and splashing, which only encouraged more sharks to attack. The shark attacks on the survivors of the Indianapolis is still, to this day, the worst shark attack in history. It is estimated that 150 plus some of the 900 men who were adrift were eaten alive by sharks. Desperate to survive, and with no drinking water, many hallucinating, survivors began to drink the salt water around them, which only worsened their conditions. Most of, if not all of the survivors went days without food or drinking water. The survivors were finally spotted days later by a U.S. Navy plane shortly after 11 a.m. on the 4th day of the survivors being adrift. The survivors were accidentally discovered by Lieutenant Wilbur C. Gwynn flying his PV-1 Ventura bomber on routine anti-submarine patrol. He radioed his base at Peleliu and sent out the many men in the water alert to his base. A PBY seaplane under the command of Lieutenant Adrian Marks took off to provide assistance and report on their status. En route to the scene, Marks overflew the destroyer USS Cecil Doyle DD-368 and alerted the captain of their emergency. The captain of the Doyle, on his own authority, decided to the scene after arriving hours. So what happened, guys, was there was 2 planes. One plane flew over, saw them, and really didn't think much of it. He probably thought it was something else. But the next plane was a PBY, and he actually saw the guys in the water accidentally, and he decided to, hey, yeah, we need to report this to base. There's lots of men in the water here. And, well, yeah. So what ended up happening was the PBY would then come around and fly over a destroyer, the Cecil Doyle DD-368, and he alerted her captain of the emergency. The captain of the Doyle, on his own authority, decided to reroute to the scene, arriving hours ahead of the Doyle. Marks's crew aboard the PBY dropped rubber rafts and supplies as they witnessed the continuing shark attacks. Disregarding orders not to land in the sea, the pilot touched down and began taxiing to pick up some of the survivors. As darkness set in, and as Marks waited for rescue vessels, he pulled men from the water into his aircraft. When the plane's fuselage was at maximum capacity, the survivors were tied to the wings with parachute cords. The pilot and his crew rescued a total of 56 men. Once signaled, a total of 7 Navy ships converged on the site and rescued the remaining men. Only 317 survived out of the 1,195 men aboard. The Indianapolis basically was sent on a Hail Mary attempt to deliver these nuclear components. She was never given any escort. She was never once even told about, the presence of Japanese submarines in the area. So literally, this poor heavy cruiser was sent unescorted. She had basically no idea what she was carrying. She had no idea. And she didn't even know, the captain didn't even know that there were submarines in the area. And funny enough, the Admiralty said, well, you might want to zigzag at your own discretion. And at the time, the captain did not see a need to zigzag because, well, there really wasn't a need to. There was no warning at all from the Admiralty about submarines. So he just thought, yeah, we're just going to make it best speed to Tinian Island, drop off these nuclear components, and join Jesse B. Oldendorf's task force. And unfortunately, on his way to that task force, he was sunk. The whole ship was absolutely destroyed by 2 Type 95 torpedoes, and there was really nothing much he could have done about it. Even when he was leaving Tinian Island, or Guam, even when he was leaving Guam to go to, regroup with Jesse B. Oldendorf's task force, he was still not given a destroyer escort, which is ridiculous. He asked on numerous occasions, can I have a destroyer escort? And they never gave him one. And when the ship sunk, the captain himself was actually pulled from the survivors. The captain actually did survive, Charles B. McVeigh, and he was actually later court-martialed, which was unheard of for any captain. There was no captain in the U.S. Navy that was court-martialed ever during World War II. Not one captain was court-martialed for their ship sinking. However, it looked like the U.S. Navy needed a fall guy, so they court-martialed Captain B. McVeigh, and they actually ended up convicting him of hazarding his ship and failure to zigzagging. So even despite the Japanese submarine captain actually coming to the trial for the defense of Charles B. McVeigh, literally the Japanese captain himself said that there was nothing Charles B. McVeigh could have done. Even if he was zigzagging, if he did a 180, there was nothing that the Indianapolis could have done to dodge those torpedoes. There was nothing. And despite that, the U.S. Navy board still convicted him of hazarding his ship. And really, yeah, it was sad. It's a sad story. And what ended up happening years later, Charles B. McVeigh shot himself. He literally offed himself because of the guilt he felt, because everybody was sending him hate mail, basically, and just absolutely shitting on him because he was the fall guy. The U.S. Navy blamed him for basically nothing. They needed a fall guy. They blamed him despite his defense actually saying that even the Japanese submarine commander of the submarine I-58 was like, yeah, there's nothing he could have done, Chief, but yet they still convicted him because they needed a fall guy. Years later, I believe, in the 90s, Bill Clinton ended up pardoning Charles B. McVeigh, and he was actually ended up getting exonerated of all charges. So, very, very interesting story indeed. It was a very sad story. The Indianapolis was pretty much doomed from the get-go, and it's kind of, like I said, sad story. But nonetheless, let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Do you guys like the Indianapolis in-game? What do you guys think of her? I think she's a great ship, and I think she also has some very interesting history as well. She was responsible for delivering the 2 nuclear components for the atomic bombs that were used on both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which ultimately forced the Japanese to surrender. So very interesting story indeed. At the same time, very sad story indeed as well. But nonetheless, everybody, hope you all did enjoy this video, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace out. Stay healthy.